I developed that muscle of anticipation, of alternative roads to get to a similar destination, and to see possibilities. I see possibilities everywhere. I think the most difficult is probably to get those people who have got influence and power to become sensitive to why diversity is so important. We've coined a terminology which is, what is your say-to-do ratio?
Hi everyone, I've got a small favor to ask. I know that many of you have been watching these conversations over the past couple of years with people who inspire. It would mean a lot to us and it would help us continue to have these conversations if you would just subscribe to the channel. Thank you.
Philippe, welcome.
Pleased to be here, John.
It's a pleasure to have you. I've been meaning to ask you on the podcast for quite a while now. I've had several people from the group, from Rogers, so ranging from Manish to Kabiaoui from Rogers Capital to Mehul, who came recently, and they all have a different mindset. And I always ask them, is it Rogers that made you, or is it you who made Rogers? I think it's a bit of both. We'll see what you answer to that. But I wanted to start out with a quote from the book that Manish wrote, and you wrote the foreword, Architects of Opportunity. And you say something in the foreword that really struck me. It says, vision, or the ability to foresee and shape the future, is what distinguishes a leader from a follower. And many people have described you to me as a visionary leader. Do you think that is a fair description of the type of leader you are?
I think it's a fair description, maybe explained by the fact that I see opportunities everywhere. So when you're short of resources in terms of how you portray the future, it's difficult to be a leader and to share a certain vision with your collaborators and colleagues. And I have that ability, which is a natural character, I think, that I have nurtured over the years. It took me some time to trust my gut feeling and my intuition. And over the years, I've learned to understand better where those ideas kind of come from. And I must say, when I go to sleep with a problem, usually I wake up with 5 alternatives. So
you dream about it? Or?
It comes down. Sometimes in the middle of my sleep, at 2 or 3, I'd wake up. And I always have a pen and a piece of paper next to my bed. Because at times, it is so clear. If I note it, I have it in the morning, but if I don't, it goes. So I scribble, and usually I don't understand my own handwriting. So
it could have been a doctor.
I bring it to work, and I give it to my assistant, Mira, who is extremely valuable, and she tells me what I wrote during my sleep.
She knows your handwriting better than you.
Better than I do. Indeed, I'm never short of ideas, and from any one situation, I realize that for the businesses that I run, for the people that are next to me, that opportunities and alternatives and solutions come to me quite easily. So I will always look for a variety of leaders around me. I thrive on diversity, I thrive on change. I need both to enjoy my day. Most of my days I have both, so which is quite exciting. I will therefore take advantage of that diversity to try and do a bit of dual level of collaboration to co-create something which becomes a common vision, which becomes a common strategy, and which unfolds with most of the leaders I work with. They have senior capabilities and abilities to convert some of those good ideas, some of those good strategies into plans. So a lot of the people who work with me, some of the people who work with me don't necessarily have the ability to portray themselves into what's going to come over the next 3, 4, 5 years, and have difficulty elaborating a vision and the first levels of strategy. So I do that part very often with them, but all of them have got the ability to convert it into an implementation plan, which very often I find is the most difficult part.
execution.
The execution, yeah. The execution, I find strategic alternatives and scenarios and opportunities in every single business issue quite easy to elaborate. And therefore, that's where I spend most of my time. I spend most of my time with my executives where I can bring something, and I will very willingly disappear when I become useless. So
yeah, and
I'm always working to become useless.
no, that's a great way of putting it, because I was discussing, actually just yesterday, we were talking about Dubai with someone and talking about Sheikh Al Maktoum and his vision and the capacity to surround oneself with exceptional people so that your vision can become reality. Were you born like this, do you think?
I think some of it is born. I don't necessarily believe in the notion of you are born a leader. I really believe that people who have got a willingness or a desire can work at becoming an effective leader. But I think that the whole notion of sensitivity that comes with intuition, I'm an observer, I think I'm a good listener. I'm always trying to understand the dynamics, small and big. I believe that the world is interconnected. We are part of a small piece of a big universe, and everything is interconnected. So that ability, I think, is partly there, but then it was maybe exacerbated or consolidated with my position in a family of 4. I've got 3 elder brothers who all have got a lot of character.
You're the youngest?
I'm the youngest.
I didn't know that. Okay.
We have a lot of character, who are well structured, and where
You don't always agree. You don't always agree.
We don't always agree, but I've got fantastic brothers who are all very clued up and very well structured with their own paths. But obviously, when you have strong characters in an environment, especially 3 older brothers, they take a lot of space.
Sure.
If you want to sing at a family party, you got to fight for the microphone, if there's a microphone.
True.
So I think that's kind of encouraged me, or somehow forced me as well, to be in a position where I was watching what was happening. And I think I've developed my acumen to anticipate, and that willingness to be different also, because obviously to be noticed, you've got to be a bit different. If you follow the crowd, then you're just one more sheep within the whole crowd. I don't really like following the crowd. And I developed my abilities. I think I developed that muscle of anticipation, of alternative roads to get to a similar destination, and to see possibilities. I see possibilities everywhere. And in the book, obviously, there's the whole philosophy of being an architect of opportunity. And a lot of people ask me, architect of opportunity doesn't really sound very well together. I got at it, in fact, with Manish, because we've worked for such a long time together.
Yeah.
We coined quite a few ways of leading the business, of bringing people on board, of helping them to grow. And why an architect is because at the end of the day, what does an architect do? An architect needs to be creative. An architect needs to work with the ability to create pleasant environments. He's got to think about the needs of the people who are going to be walking in a garden or using a space to work. So the architect is always having to co-create something for the people to use. And I've always been very sensitive to the harmony of spaces. So a good result of an architectural application or a bad one, I feel it immediately. I need my environment to be very comfortable. I'm very sensitive to those dimensions. And at the end of the day, if you think God created the universe and the planet and the planet on which we live, He's probably been the biggest architect of all.
Yes.
And all of us play our own little part in our own piece of architecture. I've had my own opportunity to do a bit of broad architectural landscaping. I look at the world, look at Mauritius, I look at the ocean around us as one big connected space that require attention, and that require attention in order for us to be able to keep it in the state in which we found it when we arrived.
Yes.
So,
and it's becoming harder and harder to do that. But before we move on, I do want to talk about sustainability in due course. But I saw that you gave the example of the architect of Versailles.
yeah.
And I think that summarizes your vision a bit, to create something beautiful, but at the same time something which makes sense for the people who are going to use this
Luneau
space.
was obviously a fantastic architect, and the scale at which he had the chance of working with Louis XIV à l'époque was absolutely amazing. And I try to look at those big realizations as things that provide us with inspiration. So if you got the chance of working on a small garden of 1,000 square meters, what do you do of it? So I've spent a lot of my time outside work, in touch with nature. My parents lived in Mocha. In those days it was countryside. Our house and garden was in the middle of sugarcane fields. We had no immediate neighbors. And I myself became an agronomist and agricultural economist later on. So my love for nature, plants, the respect for nature is something that's remained with me as a passion. So integrating with what we're doing to the space that's around us is very important for me. I cringe when I see things that have not taken the time, people that aren't taking the time to do their part of responsibility to make development harmonious and pleasant. Look at what Lee Kuan Yew did with Singapore, Garden City, and everything else. It was all about improving the lifestyle of the people by multiplying the number of gardens, and he brought in knowledge from Japan to help him develop a new community of landscapers and gardeners that made Singapore what it is today. I mean, beautiful vision. I mean, I love that kind of realization with big ambition, and you go at it again and again and again and again. Becomes a way of doing things, and at the end of the day, the result is fantastic. So yes, I don't have one angle of aspiration. I try to pick it up from many areas.
Yeah, and I think you can draw inspiration everywhere. When I look at, you mentioned diversity earlier, and that's something that I feel intuitively is very grounded in Rogers' culture, whether from legacy or obviously you help nurture that as well. What is the most, would you say, challenging aspect of your journey at Rogers? What has been the most challenging aspect of your journey at Rogers in trying to create an amazing company, culture that is grounded in diversity, inclusion, equity?
I think the most difficult is probably to get those people who have got influence and power to become sensitive to why diversity is so important. Because people come with their own ways of thinking, and at times it's a bit structured in a boxed form. So that I found was probably the most difficult piece. I was lucky because I had an environment which was very conducive to the diversity dynamics and recognition. I think when it comes to even to gender diversity, it's something that I've always been very comfortable with. Those people that don't include diversity, to me, are those who are not taking advantage of the resources that are there. And
the opportunities.
And who are excluding themselves of something which is so rich and fantastic. I mean, so I thrive on diversity, and I've managed to convince the power base that this was the way for Rogers. And but at times I've had to come back to it all the time, making sure that people really understood. And not only the power base that comes from the board, but the power base that comes from the employees themselves. The number of times I've had to interfere where you see a senior executive starting to become a bit more comfortable recruiting in his street. You know what I mean? The recruitment spectrum becomes my street.
Yes.
Or my extended family. Yes. And then suddenly you look at the team. It was a diverse team 5 years ago, and suddenly this new person is actually created a team of
Copier-coller.
copier-coller, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I've come in very often saying, well, one more of these, and it's going to be one too many, and you're out. So it's not only a notion of the power base that comes on top of you, but it's also the power base that you manage to create within a context where the type of people that you hire are happy to co-create the same patterns. And at times you get it wrong. So I think in Rogers we've privileged recruiting people that have got a broad background, Mauritians that have lived overseas. We love foreigners that have learned the Mauritian way and that have integrated Mauritian families for years. Nice profiles. We love those profiles.
Yeah, and broad skill set as well, being able to look at the world differently.
Different skill set. It's great to have someone who spent his time in marketing and banking in Singapore, and somebody else who's come from, some village in India, having done lots of great IT work. The creativity and the innovation part happens when that diversity meets, which makes it a lot more powerful. So I thrive on it. So I really love that.
That's wonderful to hear. How would you describe your leadership style? You're a harsh but fair leader. Would that be an accurate description?
I don't think I'm a harsh leader.
Okay.
I think I'm demanding, but not harsh. I don't think so. I really enjoy having a connection with people from all levels of hierarchy. I enjoy having a connection with somebody who's doing some fairly simple work on the ground and getting to know him personally and making sure that he feels led by me and inspired by me. Il faut lui donner envie. Il faut donner aux gens envie de travailler, envie de faire partie de quelque chose. And I think I was very successful on that, to create that desire irrespective of hierarchy. So I think that's one first maybe trait of character. I'm not perfect there, but I try. That's all I can say.
Of course.
And when it comes to the senior leadership, I try to hire people who are different from me, but one common trait is an open mind. I don't get on very well with people who like the status quo, who have got a bit of a set in stone in their ways. I like people who have given up on their certitudes. Ils ont abandonné leur certitude depuis longtemps.
Curious people.
Curious people who are always bringing in something new. People who travel. I encourage our senior executives to travel. I very seldom turn down an express desire to go and see something for benchmarking purposes. And I say I have a sentence that I use in the office is, when you're at school, on n'a pas le droit de gorer.
Yes.
Yeah. But when you're in the real world,
yes.
On a le droit de bien gorer. In fact, good benchmarking, c'est bien gorer dans la vraie vie.
Exactly. And then you improve on it, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I really encourage our senior leaders to travel, get those good ideas, bring them back, make sure you take a photo, do a good version of your copier-coller, and trying to improve it as you go along. And Mauritius being an island state, far from all places, we all suffer, even with today's connectivity, we all suffer from a bit of what's happening on the latest part of innovation. So traveling enables you over and above the distant view of what's happening through the media to get a good feel to what's happening on the terrace of a restaurant, what's the sense of the population, how is it settling, and are things good right now or not so good. So I favor the traveling side of things, and I try to encourage that innovation style to say, well, if we are an United States, we have 10, 5, 2 years, we are 5, 10, 2 years, 1 year behind somebody else somewhere else. And if we are making the effort and we close the gap faster than competition, then obviously we have to be ahead of the game. So that's been my way of leading as well, in terms of a curiosity and the creativity. Make sure you go and feed from what's happening elsewhere, because if you do a good copy-paste, you've got a good chance of getting it right or better than what we're currently doing.
Yeah.
The other thing is, in tough times, I spend time with my leadership team. I think I assume my part of the responsibility when things are difficult. I will not protect a difficult situation or a leader who's in a difficult context, but I will be his partner. I will be his partner in the difficulty, and really try to give another chance to a difficult situation. And we have so many examples of difficult businesses that we managed to turn around. With being with a lot of tenacity, and people have got to feel that you're not going to give up easily. And I think our long-term view, our long-term perspective, enables us to keep hope as we go through difficult times. I mean, COVID is one big example, and things like that. There's quite a lot of other contextual examples. Being part of an organization that enables you to take postures and portray things in the long term adds a lot of value. Look at Africa, for example, when we deal with private equity firms. Most of them have got a time horizon of 7 to 8 years, 9 at the most. They all tell you now, after trying out, that it's too short a horizon to make a difference in an African environment with a new business.
Yes.
So you need time. And your organization needs to be an organization that provides their leaders with that sort of time, which we do, I think. So that's the type of leader I am.
Wonderful. Wow. I should have brought a notepad. But I think all the things that you've mentioned now, I think requires a lot of empathy as well. And that's something that you say in your foreword as well, that you say that empathy, largely underrated in the business world, is the cornerstone of any successful enterprise, and the need to understand the human element. But one question I had also about empathy is, you mentioned about having a long-term vision, but I also feel in the business world, and that's also ingrained, I think, in the way the education system used to be, at least in Mauritius, is that fear of failure. And I feel like to be a good entrepreneur, you need to be willing to take risks and embrace failure. Maybe failure is the wrong word, but embrace challenges. So you've had businesses that you've been able to turn around, but have you also had situations where you felt, okay, we've tried this, it doesn't work, it's not sustainable to keep putting good money after bad, but that's okay because we've tried it and now we're going to try something else. What do you think about failure?
Of course, we've had issues of failure. My tendency is to leave it a bit for too long. My tendency is to give a second chance and a third chance.
Right.
In all fairness, for the better good of the organization, at times I should have pulled the plug earlier.
Right.
But that's my equilibrium. That's my own equilibrium. I have difficulty feeling that it's fair until we've had a good try.
Right.
Then there's complementary language that comes with it. One of the dynamics that we use is, let's try and fail fast so that we can learn and adapt quickly. So when that sort of difficulty happens, I try to push the experiential side, so we try something new,
right,
to get another result. If you try it in the same way again, as some people have said before the two of us, there's a certain expectation that's probably unlikely to be fulfilled. And we got other dimensions, but small words that coin a lot. You know, in certain environments, it's because sometimes you say a lot and you don't do a lot, or you don't really say what you do. So we've coined a terminology which is, what is your say-to-do ratio?
Ah,
right?
I like
so what's
that.
your say-to-do ratio? And very
so
often,
do you walk the talk, basically?
Yeah, exactly. And 6 months, fourth time, we're hearing exactly the same thing.
Nothing's happened. Yeah.
Have you tried something new? No. All right. Okay. I can accept you failing again by having tried something new, but continuing on the same thing whilst we said that current formula wasn't working, I become a little bit tough on that piece. I accept transitory situations where things are difficult. But then the most difficult is the situation where you develop things with complementary skills, where I bring somebody else brings something, or maybe the CEO brings something else. And you caught in that co-creation. And the person that has been growing with you does not get to that next level of autonomy.
Right.
And I think I'm going to relate that to your earlier part, which is with the educational system in Mauritius and with some of the legacy and the history, there's a portion of the people who are caught with a glass ceiling and who don't feel that they can go past the glass ceiling. At times there is a glass ceiling, but at times the glass ceiling isn't there.
Self-limiting.
It's self-limiting glass ceiling, exactly. However hard you try, at times that self-imposed limit cannot be overcome. And I am very distressed when that happens, because I get so close to becoming useless and to being able to be the successful architect of opportunity, having done my part to co-create, but then coming to a limit where I
it's out of your hands then.
For the good of the system and the person, the opportunity ought to be just a little bit bigger, but we never get there. And sometimes it stays like that for years, and we keep on, I keep finding ways of doing the complementary part that's missing, and it works. At times it doesn't work. So there's no one size fits all. We got to try, and at times you'll have someone who really wants to grow, who thinks he can grow, and you give him or her the opportunity, and it doesn't really work.
It doesn't happen.
However hard you've tried to be a good counsel or a good partner, at the end of the day, the person has got to live with what he can do or live with. So, but it's a very satisfactory road to travel. I love
because it's challenging.
It's
challenging.
And I've had at times, obviously, to let go of extremely good people that have worked with us that I never wanted to see go. But when it happens, I take the side of good for him or good for her, and we've got to do what we got to do where we are, and find our ways without the person. So when good talent leaves, it's always a little bit painful. Because I also work with emotions,
Of course.
When I've spent 5, 6, 7, 8 years working closely with someone, as I say, any hierarchy in the company who's been close to me, the emotions are important. So
of course, And do you lead different people differently? We had about a month ago, we had Richard Olive on the podcast, and he said something that really stuck with me. He said, there is nothing more unequal than the equal treatment of unequals. His thinking being, different people have different potentials, so you've got to know how to nurture them differently.
On the one hand, it's an obvious one, because by definition, you
can't have people equal.
You deal with the people where they are. And if you enjoy diversity, by the first definition of the fact that you hire different people means that you're going to have to live with that difference. I am very cautious when it comes to a few dimensions. When it comes to reward, when it comes to not only monetary reward, but reward on general.
Sure.
I tend to be very cautious with reward. I tend to make sure that people watching, if they had access to the details of,
would they feel it's being fair?
They would feel that it's fair. Treating different people differently because they are different and they have different potential, obviously, and I think we do that on a regular basis. But measuring performance and rewarding performance, I feel on that side, I tend to try and harmonize. I tend to try and bring in people who will feel comfortable with our way of rewarding. Otherwise, you end up having a clash of ways. Yes, I understand the words that Richard used, but at the same time, I feel a bit ambivalent there's a duality in that.
Of course, it shouldn't come at the cost of meritocracy.
Correct.
Yeah, understood. Correct. You are a champion of sustainability. I understand that's one of you talked about nature, growing up as a boy surrounded by sugarcane. fields. And I think I read somewhere, and do correct me if I'm wrong, a few years ago, that one of the things that keep you up at night is the state of nature, climate change challenges, etc. Mauritius being a small island developing state, it's more than just an important topic. It's I would say, a national emergency. How far or close do you think we are in the journey of making Mauritius sustainable, encouraging the circular economy, which I feel we're quite far from that? We've heard a few measures in the budget. So where do you think we fall on that spectrum of readiness to deal with climate change?
I try to use some words that hopefully can be helpful, not always easy because it's a complex topic. And very often I find unclear minds step up in their ambition to the extent of thinking that they need to behave as if they're going to save the planet, which unfortunately we can't do. We can't do individually, we can't do as a company, we can't do as a small island development state because we don't really contribute in a big way to the deterioration at planetary level.
Of course.
But that having been said, on the one hand, there is a necessity to make sure that we preserve what we have and which is best in this country, and that's the natural beauty and the people. And indeed, I said that a couple of years ago, and I repeat it at times, when I started to work on the dynamics of Mauritius from a sustainable angle, and I made a deep dive over a few months and even years to try and understand the level of vulnerability that we were at. When I understood what was happening to the ocean, I sort of went, oh my God, what do we do now? Because it's overwhelming. The ocean warming up and the deterioration of resources that we have in the ocean is the most threatening source for the survival of humans, not necessarily of a planet, because the planet obviously will overlive human beings if ever we disappear as a species. So that prevents me from sleeping at times, because on the one hand, the scale of the issue is huge and we can't address it on our own. It requires a reaction of totality of the human beings that are living on the planet, reacting in the right way at the right time. And the right time is already behind us. So you're kind of looking at a perspective where you can't win. And to feel that we've had at our own level such a beautiful island, which is living the consequences of worldwide man-made action with global warming and the heating up of the seas. And we are suffering at a faster pace than many other countries. And when you take some time to look what's happening to our own ocean, to our own lagoons, it's cringing. It's cringing because you realize when you have a cyclone, everybody kind of sees what's happening to his or her environment. And
well, we saw with Bella,
and obviously you start reacting and you make your own contribution, and you feel you're gonna come across that, a few losses of life which you would like to have avoided. But then what can we do when there is a heat wave affecting our lagoons? Nobody sees it. We had one 3 months ago, quite a big one. Nobody sees it except for a few people who dive, and there's a handful of people who dive at the same time that the bleaching episode is happening.
Yeah.
Very few people talk about it. So the consciousness of the population of an island state like Mauritius about what's happening to our lagoons and to our oceans is very low. And when you understand the dynamics of the living, and if we go back to the fact that I believe that everything is connected, that small polyp that you have with the little zooxanthelle that you have, who feed on each other and who are getting vulnerable under stress, and being accompanied by some researchers from the Musée Océanographique de Monaco. By the time you make your effort and you do your homework to understand what's going on, the researchers will tell you, well, the only thing that you can do is you've got to do everything that is possible to distress the coral.
Right.
Because the coral is so stressed that on each bleaching episode, the amount that you're going to be losing each time it comes is going to be bigger and bigger. And by the time you look at the problem and you say, hey, my solution now is coral psychology, you start to get in a space which is seriously concerning, especially when you integrate the fact that very few human beings and very few Mauritians are taking care of the problem. So we are in dire straits. We don't have a national strategy when it comes to sustainable development. We keep doing the things that we have been doing without taking the time to fully readjust. Just the current dynamics of the way that the fishing community behaves. Building a small coral plantation that becomes as big as this table will cost you hundreds of thousands of rupees, if not millions of rupees. We will never be able to rejuvenate our coral fields from replantation. It's a nice gesture. There may be some fantastic breakthrough in terms of coral propagation, but right now, science indicates that with the best effort, it will be too costly and it will not be possible to do. And today's efforts, with one episode of bleaching, all your efforts to build a coral plantation of the size of a table has disappeared. So we are up against very, very tough things. And we are not doing anything to distress our lagoons. You will see in some of the lagoons where there's coral plantation and le bouturage du corail, as they say, on the same day on a high tide or a very, very low tide cycle, you'll see a local fisherman earning his living with a harpoon, breaking 5 times more space than this little table to come out of a little octopus that big. And next to it, you're going to have the efforts of coral planting at millions and millions to try and get this much growth after 3 years. So we have a dichotomous behavior.
Do you think it's
which is bipolar,
ignorance? Do you think it's ignorance? Ignorance of...
I think it's unfortunately it's probably a bit deeper than ignorance.
Right.
On some dimensions, it's livelihoods. It's livelihoods that are concerned. So we can't blame people who have been used to a certain behavior for their livelihood to continue because they don't have any other way of completing what they need for their family. So we got to take it at that level. But the fishing community is not that big. And the amount of money it would take to find a way to make a financial deal to support the fishing community, at least to start having seasons like they have in Rodrigues, for example, where you have longer seasons that are closed to allow the fishing population to regenerate, and then to forbid some forms of fishing. Net fishing. You still have quite a few people who have licenses for net fishing. Net fishing is always dragging the bottom of the sea.
Yes.
What happens when you net fishing? When you got lead pieces to make sure that your nets are properly dragging where it needs to drag? You carry the coral with you. Every year we net fish again, and we carry the coral with us. I mean, I've been talking about the ocean because that's where I focused on when I say I'm losing sleep. Understood. On the other stuff, I may be concerned or seriously disturbed about what we're going to be leaving for our children. But for an island development state, it starts with the sea. And we're not giving enough attention to that space. I don't see any forum as yet which has come to try and address the scale of the economic consequences on our own livelihood. And let's not forget that tourism, which represents, if you add direct, indirect, and catalytic dynamics, is almost 24%, depending on what year and when we count, is dependent on our beaches. And consolidating our beaches with concrete is not going to do it. And we've already done quite a bit of that. So how much more are we going to do? We've
only got a limited amount of, I mean, unless we're going to go on Chagos.
Our beaches are just amazing. Our beaches are just amazing. And they deserve additional protection. They deserve additional care. We're not going to get a solution for beach preservation on the first attempt. There are so many things playing at the same time, including changing currents and things like that, and human intervention on a number of spheres, that the first attempt at curing will not be the right one. But if we don't do a bit of trial and error, say we have 3 or 4 pilots trying these methods, this one has worked, that one has not worked, we change this one, we adapt and we readapt. We've already interfered.
The damage is already to a large extent done.
If we don't have the courage to have a look at our interventions that have created damage, to try and improve it with new interventions, we're not going to get anywhere. That whole dynamic is a real issue that requires a lot of attention. I think we're getting into a new level of dialogue. I think the last 6 months or so, there has been a change. There's a lot of dialogue opportunities that are emerging, which is great. Now, obviously, we've got the other dynamics with waste to wealth and 0 kilometer for our food autonomy and all those things. I think all these things offer lots of opportunities. Just on renewable energy. We now heard yesterday that there was potentially up to 15 billion into solar and up to 15 billion into biomass. That's 30 billion. I think I intervened about 4 or 5 years ago on a conversation like this, saying how many projects are awaiting the right level of scrutiny to be released with the money already lined up when it comes to alternative energy sources. And yet, so little has been done. The level of consumption that we have has been growing much faster than the actual growth of our ability to produce clean energy. And the only reason why that has been the case is because the projects that have been tabled have just not been approved.
That's crazy. Yeah.
And you're in a country that has made commitments in terms of NDCs and that. These commitments are for tomorrow. I think 60% by
2030, I think they said.
2030.
Yeah.
We are not releasing the willingness of entrepreneurs within a context of fairly conservative financial initiatives that have been provided. If you compare the local incentives that there are to provide clean energy to La Réunion next door, you'll see the scale and the difference. Tiny, even with a low level of incentivization,
even that isn't being released.
The entrepreneurs are saying, yes, we're prepared to do our piece, and on that piece, you don't get the permission, you don't get the release. So we got to walk the talk. We got to improve the say-to-do ratio. I try to improve the say-to-do ratio in my organization.
Yes.
We have to try and improve the say-to-do ratio at national level.
Yeah.
At the country, we need to improve the say-to-do ratio.
Yeah.
We can't hide behind, we're not too sure, we don't know, we'll see tomorrow, I don't have the power. The train has left the station and the clock is ticking. So I wouldn't say it's desperate, because I think on worldwide ranking, we're not the only human population indicating that we are not wanting to adapt our lifestyle. On that front, we are as bad as everybody else. I think we should try to become better than everybody else. We pride ourselves to be on ease of doing business and many other factors best in Africa. We should want to be the best example, best in Africa, when it comes to the knowledge that supports sustainable development. If we manage to do that, and Mauritius becomes a knowledge hub for sustainable transition practices, imagine what that could do to our offshore sector for Africa. Channeling of financial funds and investment funds from the offshore sector towards renewable energy, over sustainable practices.
Yeah, sustainable finance.
Sustainable finance, it's huge.
Yeah. Opportunities again.
And I don't think many countries are as ready as we are to do it. It's not difficult to take a leadership role. It takes just a bit of commitment. So we're going to go there. Hey, the whole country is going there, right? And we're going to fast track those people who have got clear projects that are going to support. And we're going to use everything that's coming to us. And I think the good news is there's so many international organizations and so many friendly countries that we have in the world that are keen to support us and who want to have a best example, a best-in-class example. So lots of international institutions would love to come and provide their weight to help us become that good pupil.
But we've got to be willing to
But
do that.
we got to use what's coming to us, and
Yeah.
there's quite a lot coming to us, not necessarily being used. So we have a huge issue with the governance and the leadership on all those dimensions at national level, and we need to rally public-private sector dialogue with the NGOs, with civil society. Mauritius is a small place, and I feel that there's a level of readiness from the population. Each time you see an effort, you see so much energy coming and engouement coming behind it.
Absolutely.
So it takes those first levels of commitment in a clear way. I have hope.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question about hope, actually.
I don't have much hope for the planet, because I think unfortunately we're going in the wrong way. But I think that as an average player in the planet, I think that Mauritius can do well fast, because in terms of practices and lack of attention, it can't be much worse than it has been recently. So if we jack up and we wake up to the opportunity, I think we can do lots of great things very fast. The speed at which the ocean regenerates is fantastic. But if we don't give it an opportunity to breathe and to distress, then we're not gonna go in the right. We're not gonna create that virtuous circle. We need to go virtuous now.
Yeah, and as you said, like it comes back to your original point about interconnectivity. If we saw the planet as a breathing, living thing, the human body has the capacity to regenerate in a fantastic way. I recall from one of Manish's other books. I've read all his books except this one. I haven't read it yet. He gave the example of that octopus. It's amazing.
You've seen the movie?
No, I haven't seen the movie yet. No, but he told me about it, and I just find it incredible how, and again, the interconnectivity of species, human beings, the planet, the universe, the ability that we have to regenerate ourselves is divine. I don't have any other word for it.
I agree. If you believe in the spiritual connection, it is divine. Obviously, everything is divine at the end of the day. The opportunity here to unleash resources at the scale of Mauritius to become the island development state of reference, because we have some additional challenge. We're not the Seychelles in the sense that Seychelles has got 75,000 people. Here we got a fairly densely populated state, which comes with another level of pressure and challenges. So we got to come out with solutions that are first world as well, on some dimensions and some dynamics, which make us an interesting case, because we got all those realities of isolation, but yet all the ills of development that are there, including urbanization and putting too much cement in the wrong places. But I'm sure we can fix some of that.
Yes, and it's wonderful that you mentioned the word hope, because that was going to be my last question to you. We just had the budget speech yesterday. Did that instill hope in you for a new government, first budget after years of?
I'm the sort of person who always works with the conditions that are at play. I think there's a lot of hope in the mindset change that has been indicated. I think we have gone down the wrong lane for a bit of a long time for an isolated country like ours, by making people feel that we can focus our development growth on consumption. It's a fairly big one when it comes to wrong orientation for a country like ours, who import most of what we actually end up consuming. So obviously we're going to be creating lots of tensions in the system, including forex, including inflation and all sorts of the things. And we try to counterbalance it by asking those who are already doing well that they ought to be doing more than well. Then you're creating additional tension, because it's just not sustainable.
Of course.
And I think what we heard from the Prime Minister, Minister of Finance yesterday, is indicating that that's going to shift. You're hearing new words, nous bizarre sentir. It's an old word that we have all heard. I mean, in the early 80s, when there was the opening up of the economy and we tried new things. Serre Saint-Hilaire was part of a philosophy of Mauritians. Mauritians have cooked their bread by assembling the crumbs and making sure that none of it would actually come off the table and go to waste. And that's how we've been successful. And somehow, we gave the population the perception that it was possible to live like that. Unfortunately, nobody else owes us a living. And we have got our limited amount of resources that we can feed on. And that reintroduction of a macroeconomic discipline is fundamental. We've heard quite a bit of that yesterday, which I think is interesting. And then working on those levers that can help make a difference. Obviously, if we have a big deficit on our current account of our balance of payments, you got to work on the consumption side. And taxing of cars when there's so many cars on the roads and everything else may be obviously one way of going in the right direction, something a bit more virtuous given the difficulties that we're living. On those counts, a lot of hope and then a lot of courage when we look at all the modifications we had to a fairly successful pension scheme moving towards the CSG. That became additional money going to the consolidated fund, and that is very, 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 very difficult to believe that we even decided to do that. So working back towards something which is realistic on the pension side, delaying it to 65 years and the actual pension payment is extremely courageous and extremely difficult for.
And it's not going to be a popular measure.
For a new government going to that extent, I think is a demonstration of willingness. On those counts, I move with a lot of hope. Unfortunately, when you're making those adjustments so quickly, after so few months, many things happen so fast. You're probably working on some healthy tension between choices that need to be made. I have a sensation, my own intuition, and usually I'm not too bad on the intuitive side, is we may be paying lip service to a part of our model. And I think that part is the part that foreigners play in our economic system. The offshore sector, we all know, holds the quality of life of Mauritians. The offshore sector is by definition actually fueled by the appetite and the desire of foreigners to use our jurisdiction. When they use the jurisdiction, there are contaminating dynamics that are positive, which come with, hey, I come here with my family. Hey, I refer this country to somebody else. Hey, I spend some time in a hotel. Hey, I end up buying a villa. Or
multiplier effect.
Multiplier effects, contaminating multiplier effects, and they are numerous. And if we were alone in the world, maybe we have the right balance, but we're not alone. We're competing with Dubai, we're competing with Singapore, we're competing with other jurisdictions that are coming up that are wanting to capture the same business that we are wanting to capture.
Yeah.
And competitiveness is important. If you are a foreigner, you've come into Mauritius, you look at all of that, you look at your personal income tax threshold, which has been put for high income, high net worth individuals.
Who we're trying to attract.
Who you are trying to attract, who live in the rest of the world, who have an ability to come or not to come, who are prepared to pay business class ticket at 300,000 rupees. Those thresholds are fairly low for people like that. So that part of the equation, we've said quite a lot of things on the simple notion of our taxation system. Low fiscal environment. It's easy to say to a foreigner, you're trying to attract.
No capital gains.
I end up trying to attract this. No capital gains. Yeah. Suddenly, you got one feature that comes in where you can't say no capital gains anymore. Oh, you got capital gains on one thing. Oh, really? On what? And you start saying what it was. So somebody was just committed. He's going to pay a bit more on his registration duties. Then he's going to think about the reason why he's come, and then he's going to think when I leave, then I'm going to have one more capture of the wealth that I may have created. I think we're touching a limit when it comes to the contribution of that part of our economic solidity. You've got to be very cautious, and I think it's very important that all of us rally behind what has been said at yesterday's budget, which is we need this transition because of a recent legacy. We can't afford, for very good reasons, to let go of some of the things that were considered over the last 3, 4, 5 years, because the local stability of the population and the the comfort factor and the fairness needs to be taken on board. And that requires more money. And we are having to go and look for that more money, and that's where we found it. But that's not ideology. That's a current need that we have.
Yes.
So I think it will become very important to be very clear, because the business community, especially the international business community, who can go anywhere, will look at alternatives. We got to make sure that they fully understand
that it's short term.
That it's short term,
Yeah.
and that we're asking some piece of solidarity from them as well, in order to maintain our system, not to replace it. So these things need to be said, and they need to be said many times.
Not just once at a budget speech, yeah.
Once out of budget speech, we have that in our own business. And Manish, we started with Manish and his book, and Manish and I looked at why are we not getting to the answers that we're looking for, because we've already said a few things many times. We've already said that 5, 6, 7, in that forum.
Yeah.
And we got to some kind of psychological reference to say that on difficult change, you need to say it at least 17 times to the same people. So if that's true, then we've got a bit of a mountain to climb, because we've got to make sure that it's said over and over again. And we've got to say it together. It's got to become a national objective. And we also got to see whether in some of those things, it's still time to do just some refinements, not to try and refrain from accepting change, but from getting the change right, from trying to better the change that we are proposing.
Thank you so much, Philippe.
Pleasure.
I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I feel that you lead with passion, you lead with empathy, you lead with vision. I hope that there are more leaders like you on the island. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed the exchange.
Thank you.
Take good care.